Hello everyone. First of all, I just want to thank you for all the support you have shown me in the previous videos, and if you're enjoying these videos and you're finding it useful, then I highly recommend enrolling into my Tailwind CSS course. So far we have over 15,000 students and we're getting good reviews about this course. So I highly recommend checking it out if you want to learn Tailwind CSS in detail. So if you want to enroll into this course, you can find the link in the description. Right, so now we're going to be covering the Flexbox and Grid group classes. This is very important because we use this a lot in all the projects, and this is one of the fundamental group classes that you will always be using when you're working with Tailwind CSS. So first of all, let's start off with Flex Direction. As you can see over here, we have 4 classes: Flex Row, which is basically it adds the element inside the so it adds the elements you want to add inside the div in a row, and if you're doing row reverse, it will basically flip it and it will basically put it from the right to the left instead of left to right. And flex call, it will basically add the elements inside a column div. It will add it in a vertical fashion. And flex call reverse, it will basically reverse the elements, so it's starting from the bottom up instead of from top to bottom. Over here we have the row, just like I explained. When you use flex row and you have these 3 items over here, when you have div 1, div 2, div 3, now they're added in a horizontal fashion, so they're added to the right of each one. And when you apply a flex row reverse, it will basically it will add them all the way to the right and then to the left. It will add them basically one by one to the left. And when you're using flex call, it will add them in a vertical fashion, as you can see right there. And when you're using flex column reverse, it will add them from bottom to the top. To make it responsive, again, just like we explained in the other group classes, we just have to specify the device screen, and then you can basically add the classes that you want in order to style the div in a responsive fashion. So Flexwrap is very important as well for the project. We use it a lot. So what this does is that, as you can see from here, we have 3 types. We have Flexwrap, Flexwrap reverse, and flex-nowrap. So if we don't want to wrap, then we can apply flex-nowrap, and what this will do is that even when we have a small width that is smaller than our content, the last element will still be there. It wouldn't basically be wrapped and inserted on the next line. No, it will basically remain on the same line. And when you're using Flexwrap, as you can see over here, we have used Flexwrap. We have 3 elements inside this main div, which uses Flexwrap. Now the third element is basically appended on the second line rather than continuing on the same line, because because it can't fit in. When it can't fit in, it will basically be inserted on the next line. And when we have wrap reversed, what this does is basically it adds the elements from bottom to top, or from left to right, basically in this case. And again, to make it responsive, we just specify the specific device name, and we can put in the specific Flexwrap classes. So let's start off with Flex 1. So this allows a flex item to grow and shrink as needed, and it ignores its initial size. So basically, if we have, let's say we have an element, a div element that uses flex, and 3 elements that uses flex 1, then what it will do, let's say we have 2 elements that use flex 1. Now each element will basically take up half the space of that div element that uses flex. So if we have 3, then each one will take up a third. So just like we explained before with specifying a specific width, like for example width is a third, width is a half. In this case, we won't have to do that. We can just say flex 1, and it automatically would put in the width for us. So let's say in this case we have, if we go down to this example right over here, we have 3 elements that use flex 1, and they share a third of the parent element. So they share a third width of the parent element, because if we had 4, then they would each take a quarter. So automatically it would adjust. So let's go on Flex Auto now. What Flex Auto does, it allows a flex item to grow and shrink, taking into account its initial size. So it will basically see how much content there is for that item, and it will adjust the size of it accordingly to the content size, which is basically its initial size. For Flex 1, if there is a flex, then it will basically remove it. Let's say you have, let's say you're using, like for example, you already have many classes and you just want to remove the flex, and you can just do Flex None. Especially very handy when you want to like for example just debug something or like make sure it works, you can easily do that using flex-none, as you won't have to remove all the other classes. To make it responsive, again, just like I explained before with the other group classes, you can just specify the specific screen width, so MD, SM, LG, and then put in the flex classes you want. That way it will be responsive. That pretty much summarizes the flex. So now let's move on to flex grow. So we have flex grow 0 and flex grow. So if we do flex grow 0, it will prevent the item from actually growing with the width, with the screen's width. So if we have flex grow 1, then it will basically take up the as much space as it can that is available basically. Don't grow, so flex grow 0, again, just like I explained, we have these from the examples. See the element that has a lock, the middle element, this one is using flex grow 0, as you can see in the code. And now if we make it bigger and smaller, that flex grow 0 will always be locked and it would not grow. And the other elements uses flex grow 1, so it will actually grow. Sorry, not grow 1, it will just flex grow, and this will actually basically increase, and it will take up any available size, and it will basically increase its dimensions accordingly. Now, and we have two classes, flex shrink 0 and flex shrink. So shrink 0 does not let the item shrink, and flex shrink allows it to shrink. That's pretty much it. Now let's cover justify content. These are going to be a few important group of classes. So justify start, it will basically so if we have an element that uses justify start, then the elements inside it will be applied in a left to right fashion. So if we have for example a column, then it will be from top to bottom, and if we have basically a row, then it will be applied from left to right. Justify end will act just like if we have a row reverse. So if we have a row and we're using row reverse, then it will justify end will basically do that. So then it will add the items. If we're using a row, then it will add the items from right to left, and if we're using a column, it will add it from bottom to top. Justify center will basically center it. So if we have a column, it will center it in the middle of the screen, like vertical center, and if we're using a row, it will basically make it horizontal center. Justify between, it will basically give a space between the elements accordingly to how much space available there is around as well. Again, so these just space between, space around, and space evenly. So these are very similar in functionality. So the difference is space between only gives equal space between the elements, only the elements. Space around actually cares about around the items, not between the items. So let's say we have elements inside the div. Only the first and last one will basically be will have an equal amount of space. So between one and the actual div, so one on the left side of that one, it will have equal space between, just like 3 and the right side of it. So one on left side will have an equal margin with just like 3 and the right side. That's based around. Space evenly does between and the sides. So it basically gives equal space in between the elements and the around the elements. So basically the parent as well. So the container will have also the margin between the element and the container will be the same as the margin between the elements and the elements. So yeah, it's quite confusing. I recommend you to basically check it out on documentation and play around with it so you can basically understand. But basically, space between is mainly what we're going to be using. We're hardly going to be using space around and space evenly. Rarely we're going to be using that. Okay, so now let's go through the examples shown over here. So we have justify start. It basically adds it from left to right. Justify center. The elements will be added in the center. And we have justify end. It will be added to the right side. I think I made the mistake over here before because I said justify end is going to be the same as using flex row reverse, but it's actually not, because flex row reverse will add basically one on so the first element will be added as 1, and then the second one will be added. So it's a bit different basically. Justify end will align all the items to the right, whereas flex row reverse basically will flip them as well. So it will be, instead of 1 2 3, it will be 3 2 1. So I just wanted to clarify that before I continue. So space between. So what this does, it cares about the spacing between the elements, and it will set it equally between them. So 1 2 3 will have between them, the spacing between them would be equal. Whereas space around we don't really care about the spacing. Well, we care about the spacing between the elements, but the equal amounts will be between 1 and the container and 3 and the container. So the spacing between 1 and the left side, which is the spacing between the container and 1, is going to be the same as the spacing between 3 and the container on the right side. So that spacing, the spacing around these elements are going to be equal. And space evenly, it basically gives equal spacing between everything. So between the elements and between around the elements as well. So that covers the justify content. Now let's move on to justify items. Okay, so now let's cover justify items. Actually, we don't really need to cover this because it's pretty much just like justify content. The only difference is this is used with grids. So I mean, the only thing that's really only stretch class. So justify items stretch class, that is a bit different. I mean, that gives it it's going to be just like the flex grow, where it will allow the item to take up as much space as it can. With the justify content is that justify items doesn't use space evenly, space around, and space between. It doesn't have these classes, and it depends on grids. So yeah, that's pretty much it. So now we can go ahead and move on to the next section. So align content, I'm not going to cover this, I'm just going to cover this briefly. The main differences between the justify content and justify items is very similar. The difference is that it provides utilities for controlling how rows are positioned in multi-row flex and grid containers. So you have these classes, as you can see over here: content center, content start, just like we covered in the justify content and justify items. So content center makes the content will center it, and start will basically make it start from the left to right, and end will align it to the end. It's basically just the stuff that we went through, and only difference is that it controls how rows are positioned in multi-row flex and grid containers. Group of classes are align items. So align items, it provides utilities for controlling how flex and grid items are positioned along a container's cross-axis. So basically, it allows you to position the items vertically. So we have item start. Let's start with the item start. As you can see, all the items are basically stuck to the top, and we have center where they are actually aligned in the middle, and we have end where so basically they are stuck to the bottom, and we have baseline. Baseline is basically when the content of them are centered. So now let's also cover we also have stretch, which we didn't cover. Stretch basically stretches the height to be matching with the container, so it will be stretched out. So that pretty much covers the align items now. So this summarizes our flex and grid group of classes. As you can see from all the sections that we have covered, I hope that's basically. If you need anything and you want to basically learn about it more in detail, just go on the Tailwind documentation. I highly recommend it because it explains everything in detail. But yeah, that basically covers the entire Flexbox model and grid system. So now